Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday morning. We are back with another video taking a look at potential post-June 1st cuts around the NFL. This is part 3 of a 4-part series. If you haven't seen the first 2 parts, you might want to go check them out. They're on my channel. Basically, we're taking a look at every team in the NFL and investigating the players they could reasonably cut to save money in a few weeks here. So after we're done here, we're going to have a pretty good idea of the kinds of players who might become available in a few weeks. Now, I'm going to go ahead and reiterate this, although if you want to get the overall gist of this series, you should go back and watch part 1 at least. Um, Not every player that I list here is going to get cut. In fact, most of them are probably not. These are just players who teams could cut to save a few $1,000,000. In some cases, 8 figures, tens of millions of dollars. In some cases, the player would never get cut because he's young and has potential, because he's good, because he's valuable, because of sentimental reasons. A lot of these players would never get cut, but this is purely a fiscal analysis. Um, Second of all, even though I'm a Seahawks fan, as you guys all know, and even though I make these videos from a Seahawks fan's perspective, a lot of the players I go over would not be interesting to the Seahawks specifically. There could be a ripple effect with some of these players that affects the Seahawks, but a lot of the players I go over, I understand. The Seahawks would have no interest in signing them if they became available. Nevertheless, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a look at teams that's playing a city that start with an L, M, and most of the N's. A lot of teams in that range. L, M, N. We got over 8 teams in that area. So that means today we're going to be taking a look at the Rams, and I know a lot of Seahawks fans on my channel wanted to see who they might cut because that's of significant interest to the Seahawks. So we will be taking a look at the Rams today, so everyone buckle up for that. I know there are some people here who probably only here for that. So be ready, and let's go ahead and take a look, starting with the Las Vegas Raiders. Okay. They've got a few guys, not a ton, but they've got a few guys. They have one big bullet to fire, but unless they can find somebody else, it's unlikely that they can fire it. I'm talking about Derek Carr, their quarterback, already 30 years old. Does it seem to anybody else that he shouldn't be this old already? This seems old. I feel like Derek Carr just got into the league a few years ago for some reason. So anyway, he's due 22.1 million this year. Only due 2.5 if cut. And we know that John Gruden is not married to Derek Carr, or at least he doesn't want to be. He probably took a swing at Aaron Rodgers this offseason. I imagine he took a swing at a couple other quarterbacks. They may have taken a shot at Russell Wilson, so they would really appreciate the opportunity to move on from Derek Carr, I think, but doesn't seem like the opportunity is going to be there. If there is an opportunity, however, that is $20 million you can save by letting Derek Carr go. That's tempting. Excuse me. Okay. They got a few other players here. We got Jalen Richard, kind of a running back, fullback hybrid. Middle-aged for an NFL player, 27 years old. 3.5 million cap hit this year. 0 dead if cut. If the Raiders find themselves in a financial problem this offseason, Jalen Richard is likely to end up cut. Also possibly cut if the Raiders need the money is Daniel Carlson, a relatively young kicker who I wouldn't consider him to be one of the better kickers in the league from what I've seen. I would not. I remember, I think he was on the Vikings and then they cut him because he was bad and then he latched on in Las Vegas, but I don't think he's that good. So if you have a choice between paying him $3.5 million this year or paying him nothing if you cut him, if you could find another kicker, you might really want to cut him. That's quite a bit of money to pay to a kicker who I don't even think is that good. And finally, we have Brandon Parker. He's a reserve tackle, 25 years old. He's still young. I think he was a draft pick a few years ago. Not necessarily the kind of player you want to move on from, but if they don't see a future with him, they could reduce his cap hit from 2.4 million to 260,000. So they could save almost 90% of his cap hit if they cut him. That's it for the Raiders. So let's swing on to the next team. We have the Los Angeles Chargers. And the Chargers, I think, are going all out to try to win this year. So they're unlikely to do anything in terms of cost cutting because they still have that rookie QB on his rookie deal. So they don't really need to shed cap, but if for some reason they needed to. If they, I mean, I don't even want to say if they traded for Aaron Rodgers because that's ridiculous. But if something happened, here are their options. Linval Joseph is the big one. He's a 32-year-old defensive tackle, still pretty good, but I don't know if he's $12 million good, and only $4 million dead if you cut him. So if the Chargers needed to, they could cut him. Chris Harris, he's a cornerback they picked up last year. He's 31 years old. Due 11.3 million this year. Would only be due 5.8 if cut. That's still a lot of money though, and Chris Harris is still pretty good. So yeah, to be clear, I don't think the Chargers are going to do any cost cutting stuff. They're going all out to win this year. They have to be. Herbert's on that rookie deal. They got to go for it. Justin Jones is making 2.4 million this year. He would be due less than 10% of that if you cut him. He's a young defensive tackle though, probably going to be kept around. And then Kazir White is the final guy from the Chargers. He's a young linebacker, 25, due 2.3 million this year. Only due 163,000 if cut. And that's really it for those two teams. Both those teams don't have a ton of options. So let's move right along. All right, new page. We have the Los Angeles Rams, and this is the one I think a lot of people were excited to see. Who could they cut if they have financial issues? Because we know they have a lot of big contracts down there. Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, now Matthew Stafford, now all the dead Jared Goff money. I think they gave a bunch of money to Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, so they may have to trim down a little bit somewhere. If they do, look for them to do it with Rob Havenstein. He's probably their lead candidate to get cut. He's their starting right tackle. He's 28 years old. He's due 8.3 million this year and only due 1.6 if cut. So don't be surprised if the Rams decide to move on from Havenstein if they find themselves in a financial crisis. All right. Then we have Tyler Higbee. He's their tight end, their starting tight end. Unlikely they move on from him because they just lost Gerald Everett. What are you going to do? Lose both your starting tight ends in one off season? But if you did, you would go from a $7.5 million cap hit to a $3.6 million cap hit post June 1st. So I wouldn't rule it out. Unlikely, but it would save almost $4 million. That could count for something. Johnny Hecker, their 31-year-old punter, who's been a thorn in the side of the Seahawks for a while, and there you go. That's how you spell his name. But he's due almost $5 million this year. That's a lot of money for a punter. I know he's a good punter, but that's a lot of money for a punter. And he's only going to be due 1.2 million if cut post June 1st. So if the Rams need to carve out a few $1 million, this is not a bad place to do it. And then we have Darius Williams. He's on a fully non-guaranteed contract of 4.8 million. Would be due nothing if cut, so he has to be considered a strong cut candidate for the Rams. And then we have Sebastian Joseph. He's another one of these young guys on a rookie deal that's about to expire. So he's due he is 26 years old, due 2.2 million against the cap this year. Only due 40 grand if cut. If they need to carve out an extra 2 million, this is a pretty good way to do it. Sebastian Joseph does not play for them very much, I don't think. And then we have Kenny Young linebacker, 25 years old. Basically the same story as Sebastian Joseph. He's due 2.2 million against the cap, and you can cut him and lose nothing. So the Rams have some really appealing salary cap cut options, actually, and they need them because that's a team that has made massive investments in their star players, all up and down that offense and the defense. So it's very easy to imagine they have financial hardship that they're going to need to work through via a cut or two. I really do expect Havenstein to end up on the market if the Rams need to save some money. And by the way, if he is, the Seahawks need to kick the tires on that one because Havenstein is still a pretty good right tackle, and I am inclined to believe he could be better than Shell, and he has familiarity with Shane Waldron's scheme. So the scheme that we assume Waldron will run. So that's very appealing to me. And with that, let's move on to the next team, Miami Dolphins. They have a lot of guys, and they still have a QB on a rookie contract. So they don't necessarily need to do anything. I think they have enough money, but they did give out a ton of free agency dollars last year to guys like Byron Jones. So you may see them needing to trim down a bit, and they have some very clear options. Emmanuel Ogba, middle-aged defensive end. you have to figure his value to the team went down when the Dolphins got Jalen Phillips in the draft. So that $7.5 million cap hit could be completely wiped away if you cut him. They may do that. You have Benardrick McKinney, a middle-aged linebacker, $7.2 million against the cap. Do not a thing if you cut him. So Benardrick McKinney could end up on the chopping block. Eric Rowe, safety, another middle-aged defensive player, do 6.1 million this year. Only do $500,000 if you cut him. So good way to save $5.5 million. Very appealing option if the Dolphins need to trim their cap down a little bit. Albert Wilson, a wide receiver, a fringe contributor wide receiver, 28 years old. Another middle-aged guy, another $5 million plus cap hit, and you can save almost $3 million if you cut him. And remember, the Dolphins did just draft Jalen Waddle, so they may very well have fewer snaps to go around to their wide receivers. So don't be surprised if Albert Wilson gets out there. Excuse me. Speaking of wide receivers who might end up on the chopping block, we have Joaquim Grant, 28-year-old wide receiver, due 4.7 to presumably not play all that much this year because the Dolphins have good receivers in front of them, or you give him $600,000 after you cut him. So that's a saving of $4.1 million. I would probably do that if I was the Dolphins and I needed the money. We have a few other guys too. Jesse Davis, offensive tackle, 29 years old, due $4.6 million. Only do $1 million if cut. Dolphins have a lot of ways to save money, and they don't necessarily need it right now is the thing, but if they did end up needing it somehow, they have a lot of good options. Jason Sanders, their kicker. Good kicker, but I don't consider him to be one of the best in the game, and he's due to make a $3.4 million cap hit. That's a pretty big chunk of change to pay to a kicker who is, as far as I can tell, not one of the better kickers in the league. And you could pay him nothing if you cut him. That has to be an appealing option to the Dolphins if they need to save money. Jerome Baker, reserve linebacker, young on that rookie contract, but you could either pay him $2.7 million to be on the team this year, or you can pay him less than $250,000 to not be on the team. We also have Durham Smythe, cool name for a backup tight end. He's 25 years old, due $2.3 million this year, only due $160,000 if cut. That's a savings of well over 90% of his salary, so look for them to consider doing that. And that's it for the Dolphins. A lot of names on that one. Look for a couple of those guys to shake free in cost-cutting measures, even if the Dolphins don't necessarily need them. Okay, moving on. We have the Minnesota Vikings. They have a few options, but they're not great. Danielle Hunter, you could save almost $10 million if you cut him, and he did suffer a pretty big injury last year that could sap his effectiveness, but you still would have to pay him $8.3 million. He's due $18 million. If he recovers from the injury last year, he's going to be worth $18 million. He's a really good player. So I don't see this one happening, but nominally you could save $9.5 million if you cut him. A lot of money to be paying dead cap, though, to a guy that you could just keep around for basically double the price. So I don't think that'll happen. Eric Kendricks is another one. You could save a lot of money, but he's a good player. I don't think you want to do this when you're still kind of sort of trying to win right now. He's due $12.5 million this year, which is fat. You could save $8.5 of that million by cutting him, but wouldn't you rather just keep him than pay him $4 million to go play for somebody else? You would think so, right? All right, next up we have a guy who I think makes a little more sense. He's still a established, capable veteran defensive player, but this guy's actually kind of old. He's 32 now, and he's due $10.3 million this year. That's a lot of money for a guy who's losing his effectiveness, and you don't have to pay him a thing if you cut him. He's due zero dead cap if you cut him. So Harrison Smith could be a surprise cut in the coming months. Don't be surprised if he shakes free on the market. Kyle Rudolph, I think the Vikings have already basically announced, yeah, we're going to cut him. But just in case that's still worth discussing, the 31-year-old tight end is due $9.4 million this year and would only be due $1.5 million dead. So they're saving almost $8 million. Kind of a no-brainer cut right there. Brian O'Neill is another guy. This is a guy I think they like a little too much to cut. He's a good right tackle. I floated him in potential Seahawks trades last year before the deadline because the Vikings started their season out so badly. but the Vikings didn't trade him then. I don't think they're going to cut him now. He's a 25-year-old capable right tackle. However, you could reduce the cap hit from 2.8 million down to 300,000. If you did, that's a savings of almost 2.5 million. And the Vikings are not in the greatest salary cap situation right now. They are paying a lot of money to Kirk Cousins, so don't be shocked if they end up doing something a little drastic to get under the cap. And Brian O'Neill's at least on the list if they end up needing to do something like that. All right, and then you have Mason Cole. He's a reserve offensive lineman for them. Due 2.2 million this year on his rookie deal. I think it's his rookie deal. Do nothing if you cut him. So that'll be an appetizing option because there's no dead money at all. And that's it for the Minnesota Vikings. All the money they're paying Kirk Cousins does put them behind the eight ball, but they've already done a lot of things to get underneath that cap. So I don't think they're going to need to do any more. That being said, don't be shocked if you see Harrison Smith go bye-bye because that's a lot of money to be paying a 32-year-old safety, and you could pay him nothing if you let him go. But yeah, let's move on to the next team, New England Patriots. And this is a team that just spent all the money in free agency, so they may very well view this as an opportunity to dump some of their older and more expensive veterans. They have a lot of guys they could let go in the coming months. We have Stephon Gilmore. They're probably going to trade him before they cut him, but it's kind of the same thing for them financially. 30-year-old cornerback that they seem ready to move on from. Due 16.2 million this year. The dead cap hit if you let him go would be 7.7. A lot of dead cap, but the opportunity to save 8.5 million is pretty good. Then you also have another veteran defender, Donta Hightower, 31-year-old linebacker. You could save almost $10 million if you cut him. So because the Patriots at this point in time aren't paying any quarterback a ton of money, they don't really need to do a lot of things, but if they do need to do something, Donta Hightower will probably be first on the list. Due 12.4, only due 2.5 if cut. Trenton Brown is a right tackle. I think they acquired him from the Raiders last year. Could be wrong on that. He's still good. He's 28 years old. Unlikely to move on from him unless you have to. But if you have to, you go from a $7.6 million cap hit to a cap hit of nothing in 2021 if you cut him. So decent option there. Jonathan Jones, another cornerback who's making a lot of money on this Patriots defense. He's a little younger than Gilmore, but nevertheless, he's making $7.4 million this year. You let him go, he's making $2 million. So 5.4 million in savings right there. Excuse me. Adrian Phillips, middle-aged safety, making 4.3 million against the cap this year, only due 1.3 if cut. So $3 million savings, worthy option if the need for money arises. J.C. Jackson, another cornerback on this defense. I think he was really good last year, so I seriously doubt they're going to grandstand over his relatively small $3.4 million cap hit. But he's due nothing if cut, so more shocking things have happened before. Matthew Slater, who's been on the Patriots forever, it seems like, 35-year-old special teams gunner. Maybe it's the end of the road. He is due $3 million this year, and he's only due less than $800,000 if you cut him. Chance to save 2.2 million on a guy who's probably at the end of the line anyway, so look for them to maybe do that. And that'll do it for the Patriots section of this video. They have a lot of higher profile guys who could end up on the market. Don't be shocked if one of these name players, and I know a lot of players on the Patriots are name players just because they were in the playoffs every year forever, but don't be surprised if one of them ends up cut because some of these guys are making more money than they're worth. All right, let's move along to the next team on our list, the New Orleans Saints. They have some interesting options, and they really need to strongly consider them because financially, even though they've done a lot of work to get under the red because after this offseason, there still may be more work to be done. Last I checked, they were barely under the cap, so don't be shocked if something else comes up. So their options are Latavius Murray. You could save 3.2 million against the cap this year on the 31-year-old running back if you cut him. Goes from a 4.2 cap hit to a $1 million cap hit. Patrick Robinson, aging cornerback, goes from a $3.9 million cap hit to a $1.3 million cap hit, savings of 2.6. You might need to do these two cuts just so you can sign your rookies because the Saints haven't signed their rookies yet. Traquan Smith, young, talented wide receiver, Not really somebody you want to let go unless you have to, but financially it makes some sense to go from a $2.4 million cap hit to a $200,000 cap hit. I think the Saints are probably going to use this as kind of a like break in case of emergency option, but it's on the table as a way to save 2.2 million, and that's really it for the Saints. They've already kind of done everything they can do, unfortunately. But if they need to unload a few more bullets, these are the bullets that I see them owning. All right, moving along, the New York Giants. Who could they release to get under the cap? Because they just gave out a lot of money. And they haven't paid Daniel Jones yet. They don't need to yet, but it's looming. So even if they're not in money trouble yet, they may find themselves in some next year. So who could they let go? Riley Dixon, their punter, 27 years old, due almost 3 million this year, only due a quarter of a million if cut. So if you can find another viable punting option, that's probably something you want to look at. 2.9 million to a punter is not ideal. Spencer Pulley, their backup center. I talked about him a little bit earlier this offseason when I was trying to compare players to Ethan Posick. He's very forgettable as a player, and he's only due 2.7 million, but he would be due nothing if you cut him. So look for Spencer Pulley to possibly end up on the chopping block. Also, a candidate to end up on the chopping block is Lorenzo Carter, edge defender. He's young. I think he would be a great fit in Seattle, honestly. So if this ends up happening, Seahawks, please go kick the tires on Lorenzo Carter. He did break something in his leg last year. He got a disastrous injury last year, but if he can recover from that, you might see him make an impact in the league yet. But don't be shocked if the Giants move on. Due 2.4 million, only due 260,000 if cut. Then we have B.J. Hill, another young defensive lineman for the Giants, and he's basically in the exact same boat as Lorenzo Carter. He's probably worth 2.4 million, but it's possible the 2.1 millions in savings you could get is worth more to the Giants right now. And I believe that is it. Yes, that is it for today. Those are all the teams we're going to cover. Next up is the home stretch as we do the final 8 teams. Let me know down in the comments who you want to get cut. Who in this video do you like? Who do you want to shake free? What appeals to you? Let me know. I'm going to get out of here. Peace out. Go Hawks. And hey, some teams are going to have to make some tough sacrifices. Who's it going to be? Let me know who you think. See you later.